Welcome to the Felonious Scribe. We're your hosts,
Dawn Hosmer
and Kristine Raymond, writers of mystery, mayhem, and murder. Hey, Dawn, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I am good. I am ready to get into this week's question. Are you ready?
I think I am. We'll see.
Well, one of my favorite authors, and she's also a personal friend, PJ Tracy of the Monkey Wrench series, she sent a question for us to discuss. And it is, do you scare yourself when writing? That's an easy one, right?
My brain is a scary, scary place. I find myself just waking up in the morning. What about you? I'm like, my mind can go so many places.
I think the question should be, do you scare yourself all of the time? And is writing an exception?
For me, I think it's interesting because I think if I read my books as a reader, I would be very scared. But as a writer, I feel like the scenes don't scare me because I have control over them.
Right.
So even though horrific things are happening and things that to live through would be terrible, it doesn't scare me as a writer because ultimately I get to decide what happens. What about you? Like, do you feel the same way or?
Well, yeah, because when I read a book, to me it's like watching a movie. It's one of the reasons I like reading cover to cover if I'm able to, because the entire plot, the entire story just plays out as pictures in my head. But when I'm writing, I don't write in that same time frame, that same amount of time. You know, it takes weeks, months, years sometimes to write a book.
Yeah.
So even though you could read a particularly scary paragraph or scene in a matter of minutes, it might take months to write.
True.
So I think it's kind of like I don't have time to get scared. Now, the process of writing is scary.
Scares the crap out of me.
But then again, you know, with Finagle being a cozy mystery, I didn't get really down and dirty. I mean, and I need to be careful not to give anything away, but there are some things that happen both on the page and off the page that are violent, but yet they're told in such a way, because the cozy has such a kind of a humorous tone to it, that it just doesn't play as being like, let's say, a Stephen King or a Dean Koontz or even honestly PJ Tracy, because you know her Monkey Wrench books are thrillers and police procedurals, and there's a lot of blood and guts and gore and stuff like that. So it's I think with the cozy, I haven't really hit that point where I'm, you know, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. It's more like, oh, that's terrifying. How can I make it funny?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I did last night my first ever virtual book club to discuss bits and pieces.
Oh, cool.
And one of the things that came up that I kind of feel like fits with this discussion is someone asked if when I write a particularly intense scene, how does that affect my mood? And what I found, like you said, what comes to mind automatically is chapter 12 of Bits and Pieces, because it was a very, very intense chapter. And while normally I sit down and I write one chapter per sitting, that chapter I had to break up into several writing episodes because it was so intense. And so I had to get into the mind of a killer and try to feel like what it would feel like if they were in my mind. So I had to break that up into smaller doses of writing because it was so intense. So while it didn't necessarily scare me, I think it was just so intense that I needed a break, if that makes sense.
And there have been times when I've been writing even the romance stuff, because here's kind of the misconception sometimes about romance. A lot of readers hear that and they think that that's all the entire book is just like this one big flowery kind of story, and it's really not. There's a lot of other stuff that happens, at least in mine, so there were some scenes that were so intense that they left me emotionally drained just at the end. I've made myself cry, like sorrowful tears. I've made myself laugh so hard that I've cried. I've written things where it's just been like almost gut wrenching, like you really feel it in here. And I think those are all like really good marks of a great author. I mean, because if I don't feel it, the reader's not going to feel it. It's just going to be dry words.
Right.
You have to have that emotion behind it.
And now something that's been interesting for me is my books have been made into audio. And even though I know these books inside out, I can read them with no emotion at this point because I've read them so many times. But to hear it on audio, like that can creep me out because it's somebody else reading my words, and you can feel the intensity and you can feel the fear and you can feel the panic. And so like my first listen through of Bits and Pieces, when she did that chapter 12, my heart was racing. Like it was so intense and so powerful that I could understand how that chapter could be scary for readers.
Yeah. That's cool though. And that's a good narrator.
Yes.
That can put that emotion behind the words.
Yes. And I think, I don't know about you, but I think the part of the writing process that scares me the most when coming up with these storylines is thinking of all the what ifs, because part of what I do is imagine like, what if is at the stem of everything I write. So what if a madman could invade your mind? What would that feel like? What if this character did go through this horrible torture scene, and thinking through that sometimes scares me because it's like, ugh, I don't even want to imagine that, like, let alone write it. So yeah, sometimes that does creep me out, like thinking through some of the things I could put my characters through.
Well, and again, with your books being based in reality, in actual things where these things have happened, that must make that even more like, okay, I'm not just making it up. This person that this is based on really did feel these things and go through this terror and this emotion and this pain. And yeah.
And it's like empathy for the person in real life that experience these things, and just heartbreak that people go through sexual assault or domestic violence, or some of these awful things. And so it's more than fear, it's heartbreak, I think, that this really happens, and people live through this and sometimes don't make it and sometimes do, and then have to deal with the repercussions.
I've got to tell you, the part in the end of Echoes that I think got to me more than anything else, and I need to word this carefully because I don't want to give anything away. It is the scene that takes place in the kitchen with the mother and the son and the duct tape and we'll say a match.
Oh, yes. Yes.
That whole thing that happens, like honestly, I had to put the book down after that just to kind of catch my breath and take a break. You wrote that like I was there, and I mean, if I were wearing a hat, hats off to you, because I don't know how you're able to write that. Like, I'm in awe of authors that can write that really gut wrenching horror, because it is horror. It's just a different type of horror. Like,
Right.
yeah.
And that chapter, there were many chapters in the end of Echoes that kind of stripped me.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I did so many different perspectives, because it was too hard to sit with one character for too long, because it was such a heavy story from beginning to end, that to
Right.
sit in any one character's pain for too long was too much. Where if I shifted, I could then get into my brain more and out of my heart and say, okay, brain, you need to switch. Now you're in Kendra's point of view. You know what I mean? So it removes
Right.
some of the emotion from it. But yeah, I mean, that whole book is terrifying, really, on a
Yeah.
personal level. To imagine going through any part of that book is terrifying. So I guess if I think about it too much and think about the story, yes, it's all very terrifying. But
What?
go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to ask, what do you think the scariest thing you could ever write is? Like, have you ever thought about that? Or do you have plans for that?
Oh, my mind is a dark place. I could never write straight out horror because I'm a wuss. So if I were imagining some of the things that would have to go into a horror novel, that would scare me too much to write. Like, do you know what I mean? Like if it
I
were
do.
ghosts or demons or
Oh yeah, I don't do anything demonic.
no.
Nope, cannot. I I can't watch demonic movies. I can't, like, okay, so I can watch something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I love, which has demons and stuff, but again, it's told in kind of a campy sort of way that,
Right.
but like something like I don't know, Rosemary's Baby or any of those kind of things. Nope, not this girl, not doing it. That's where I draw the line.
Yeah. And I still am haunted. Like when I was way too young, and Mom, if you're watching this, what were you thinking? Um, when I watched The Exorcist and Amityville Horror for the first time. And those, I can still picture scenes from those movies so vividly. I was probably 7 or 8 when I watched them. Those scenes are still so vivid in my mind that it creeps me out sometimes. So I could never like dive into the world of horror. It's hard for me to even read friends' horror books. Like I need them to compare it to a movie before I'll even try to read it. Like, tell me what kind of movie this is like. Is it Twilight Zone or is it The Exorcist? Because if it's The Exorcist, no, not reading it.
Right.
What about you? What do you think the scariest or most detailed scene you could write that would be scary?
Scary for me would be honestly anything where I'm hurting an animal. I that and yeah, I couldn't stomach that. I sort of wrote a scene like that where an animal, a beloved animal, gets injured in the Hidden Spring series, and I won't go any further, but even that was difficult for me to write. But again, I've read books that I love by authors I love, but sometimes they'll put a scene in where an animal's being mutilated by the psychopath or this or that. It's like, no. And I don't know that that's necessarily scary. It is to me.
Yeah.
I just I could not do that. But aside from that, I don't think I've ever really let myself go. Again, with what I write, I haven't had the opportunity to just like turn loose my brain and say, okay, this is the deepest, darkest thing, have at it. Because
Right.
again, with the cozy, I need to keep it off the page. I will say, and who knows if it'll ever get written, but I do have an idea for actually several thrillers where I can kind of delve into that kind of stuff a little bit. So if I ever get there, it'll be kind of interesting to see how twisted my mind is.
Exactly, and see how deep and dark it can go.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of going through that with trying to write the sequel to Bits and Pieces. Is I have a story idea and kind of an idea of who the antagonist is, but it's a really dark, twisted story. And I'm having trouble, like, even getting my mind to wrap around that. Like, I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's this person's motive for doing the things he's doing? Because for me, that has to be completely clear. Like, what is their driving force? And what made them be this way? And I'm having trouble answering those questions. So to go that dark without a reason is hard for me. But from the shows I watch, sometimes people are that dark and do horrible things for no reason, or no reason that
No,
understand or find.
No apparent reason.
Right.
Yeah.
But as the writer, I feel like I have to understand that.
But I think some people are just born that way. I mean, I really do. They're born, either without a conscience, or there's something missing in them that I really do I believe there are some people that are just pure evil.
I do too.
Without getting into a theological discussion, I really do believe that there are some people that are just evil.
I do too.
Thankfully, I've never met any, so hope it stays that way. Yeah. Well, none that have shown that side to me, but
well, I will say one thing, because I'm thinking back through some of the things I've written. I started a book maybe a year ago, and I got about 40,000 words in and put it aside. That truly did scare me, writing, and it was about a school shooting. And that's because I have a child that goes to school. And I remember I was in the midst of writing this, and we had to go to a function at his new school. And I kept like pounding these questions, like, well, what's your security plan? Like, because in the school he was going to, there was a middle school, but also like a smaller high school magnet program attached for kids that were having trouble with graduating, that kind of thing. And my big thing was, what keeps these high schoolers from getting angry, coming in with a gun and killing my middle schooler? And the principal's just looking at me like, what is and finally I had to take a step back and say, first of all, I'm a writer, and I'm currently writing about a school shooting, so this is like so fresh in my mind. But writing that book terrified me because I could relate so much to what that would be like to get that phone call, or to have your child go through that. But it was an intense write, and I actually had to put it aside for a while because I just didn't feel like I could emotionally detach enough to tell the story I needed to tell.
Do you plan on finishing it?
Yes. I think that after I write the sequel to Bits, I think that will be my next project, because I've had time to distance from it and really think through some of the characters a little bit and the storyline that I want to tell. And I just feel like for a third book, that was too big for me, if that makes sense. That was the third book I was attempting to write. It was just too big.
So would you like to read just a little bit of Bits and Pieces, or give the listeners so they know what to expect, kind of thing?
I'm actually going to read a little bit of the end of Echoes.
Oh, okay, cool.
Just because I had it right here. I'm actually going to read, this is a little snippet that appears right before chapter 1. Do you remember me? Do you remember the way my hand felt as it brushed against your cheek? Do you remember the way you would look into my eyes and see the future? Do you remember the sound of my laughter? Does it echo through your mind as loudly as the pain? Is my voice ever louder than those shouting in fear, rage, judgment, and condemnation? Can you still see my smile and know it will all be okay? Can you hear me say I love you? Do you know I still mean it no matter what?
See, that brings that story right back to me.
That's just, I have those little snippets throughout the book, and hopefully readers put together who's talking in each of those snippets as they went, because I felt they were important voices to put in the story. But one thing I would like is for PJ Tracy to comment and let us know if she ever scares herself with her writing.
Okay, there you go, PJ.
Challenge. Her books are on my list to read because you've talked so much about them, but I can't ever get the series at the library. Like I can only get like book 3 or something. Like I can't find the whole series. So,
which actually, if I remember correctly, book 3 is Dead Run. Is book 3 Dead Run, which is my favorite out of all of them. They can be read out of order. They don't have to be read in order. It's one of those that the characters develop over time. So if you start from the first one, you get more of their background than you do like several books in, their backgrounds kind of already been introduced. But yeah, they're all great. But I love Dead Run.
Okay, well,
she knows she has to write another Dead Run.
Before we need to hear from PJ about whether she scares herself with her writing. So that's our challenge. And we would love to hear from listeners. If you guys have questions, either contact us at the form below or on any social media. We're both on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So share your questions there with us. We'd love to answer them.
Yes.
Do you want to go ahead and wrap us up, Kristine?
Sure. Okay. So that is all for this episode of the Felonious Scribe. Join us next time as we continue our exploration into the dark and twisty side of writing. And remember, life's more interesting when you add a little mystery. Bye, Thanks guys. For joining us. Bye.
Happy Easter for those who celebrate.
Bye.